So, welcome to you all to the second panel of our first day of the Climate Fiction Festival. So, we're talking here about resistance and literature, and as a guest here we've got Sina Kamala Kaufmann. So, hello and warm welcome to you. We're going to present you in two roles. First of all, your role as activist, and secondly as an author of fantasy near future stories. And we would like to have an open and free discussion, but still we're going to follow some sort of a small structure. First of all, we're going to go through, present the book Extinction Rebellion, how this was created, and then there's going to be a second part and it's going to be a talk about your book, Light or Bright Material, which was published by the editor this year, and it was published in 2019, the same year as the Extinction Rebellion movement. So this first book is it's described as a handbook. Also the original in English, written in the UK, and it's a book by Extinction Rebellion, and we're talking here about forms of resistance that are promoted and fostered and carried out by Extinction Rebellion, how they would also like them to happen in the future as well. The second book is something completely different, and so this Sina Kamala Kaufmann, you wrote this with typical literary scenarios, completely different stories, but the two of them are connected in some way, even though the stories are quite different. So would you like to tell us how these were created when you wrote this book? So you translated and published this book, if you want to tell us. So you got the floor. So hello, and thank you very much for the invitation. So it's a very nice festival here, even though there are no people, and we're here on our own. So the question was how this Extinction Rebellion Handbook was created and came into being. First of all, Extinction Rebellion, the movement was created at the end of 2018 in the UK, and the book, or the handbook from the movement, was published, I think, in April. This was already published by Penguin. This is not a drill. And just a short time afterwards, then at the beginning of June, then it was really published then, or September, then we also had the German version of the book. And we compiled it. We compiled it in a very short space of time and made our own book, an Extinction Rebellion. We're talking about a special type of method, and how can we be more active against climate change? And this talked to me on a certain level, because sort of like we've all got a responsibility for it, and I found that this was a very nice thought. It was personal for me, and this book this is a form of resistance for me. I stood up to the mark and I said I'm going to be an author because I've got a certain amount of experience and in my previous life, and I didn't see any other alternative than to imagine what the world could look like and to see sort of like extra strategies and to try formulate them in thoughts and to try get out of the situation that we're stuck in at the moment. And it was a way to formulate and write visions of what our possibilities for action is, because and sort of like Extinction Rebellion then started at a time when I was publishing this book, and a friend of mine in Britain told me that she's got a very fine feeling for things and sort of like keeps around the ball, as it were. And And I go there once a year, and so like I twittered, so I was sort of like, I'm interested in knowing what Extinction Rebellion's got to do in Germany. And then she answered really quickly, so what do you mean? We're all Extinction Rebellion. And so she got in touch with me at the event, and so we entered into contact. So that was early in 2019, and there, sort of like I kind of accidentally fell into this role, because then when they asked about the translation, they were sort of like saying, if the publisher gets in contact with you, whatever. I really wasn't planning on having such a major role. But I was sort of like thinking about this and that while you're talking about the publisher, and then they sort of like said, oh, you just take care of it. And so I took over the responsibility for this German version of the book, which I really, really took on board. Because for me it was a because it was a special time and moment for me, because it was a time when I was hoping that this could make a difference, and that we could find a way of acting that could launch us on the path towards transformation. And with this vision way of thinking, and this was my ambition when I did this book. And you didn't do it by an underground publisher. And how did you get involved with Fischer? Fischer's not exactly underground. Because I would have given it to an underground publisher. But it was great. It was a process, for a left-wing movement like Extinction. It doesn't matter whether it's left or right. It was just that this resistance. This doesn't play an important role, because we really have to think about how we're going to continue with things in the future. And they wanted to buy the rights. They bought the rights for the UK, or they wanted to buy them. And that only could succeed if they had rights with respect to the German version, and keep control of that. And it was Helle, and she was the reader, and it wouldn't have happened without her. Sort of like there were so many different contexts here with the movement. There was, we've got to have a book, about a movement that's so diverse, and you've got to make it was a miracle that it was written and compiled in such a short space of time, and that it was at all possible to publish it. But you managed to keep it all together. So author here isn't on the cover, or the publisher, or the editor, but you translated. Did you translate the text? No, the translation. I didn't translate this book. I'm not a translator. And sort of like it was also a really short time frame. And Timmerman he knows all these discourse and speeches here. So a lot of words and vocabulary here that we use. Sometimes, like the rebellion declaration, sort of like a lot of texts that come or whatever, and the Timmerman does this and keeps an eye on the ball, and Fischer, then we really got this done in a very short time frame. And so there was the ball was going back and forward between these people, so I kept an eye on the whole thing. And we managed to compile all these new texts as well in a short lead time. And it was quite a lot of work. And, sort of like we tried to keep the names so small, even though we've got really wonderful authors. And, sort of like we tried to keep them, it representative. And that, it's very important. Sort of like when you're trying to market something, or the so-called marketing. And with this book, then there was also a conflict involved, because Fischer, sort of like this is a completely different way of doing things, and it was a negotiation when we were sort of like saying the last 30 pages, we were sort of like saying, let's keep them, the last 30 pages, let's keep them free. So there are just things like instructions for silent communication in groups. And also So,
Und das ist einfach ein How-to-Teil, ne?
and this is,
Wie man
and you sort of like it's an instruction or a guidebook for how you
den Widerstand
practically organize resistance in practical terms. And, you know, I found that these thoughts are really interesting, and I think that you weren't able to prevent yourselves, you know, sort of like as a former press speaker, you know, you know, sort of like I wrote it here, sort of like you corrected me. I'm not a press speaker here. I'm not here as a press speaker because that's not the way you wanted things, but how can you have a marketing campaign about this type of book, for example?
Ich fand das eine spannende Frage und auch eine Frage,
I found this was an exciting question, and it was a question that was not fully answered for the whole climate justice movement, which is also a big topic, and also for XA, which is a big problem when some of the managers or director people, we want a different way of doing things. We want a horizontal movement. We want representation. And sort of like, then the problem is that everybody speaks for themselves, so how can you shape things when, you know, sort of like when the media wants us to be more organized? And it's difficult to resolve this issue because sometimes you've got to find pathways and ways of doing things. But I think that things are also moving even within the movement. And how will we deal with one another? We're not talking about how to be more effective, but how can we do things together? You know, we have to really restructure and reimagine cooperation and sort of like, you know, how can we reach transformation with this diversity of people and to do the impossible, to bring it about and to communicate in a very fine-tuned way, sort of like when we have to make sure that something new comes out. And so like linear identity, which is the name that's not on there, but maybe the things that I have to learn and things that I have to give to the group and convey to them and how things happen. And sort of like how to develop this whole self-concept and how to develop common experience as well. And I think this is something that as well the groups that are intrinsically motivated, like, you know, sort of like we can also have art input and sort of economic input into this cooperation. And you know, I can see this happening and being created within these groups that are involved. But you were talking about transformation, and I'm thinking about the major transformation. We're thinking about the change of economy, but you're talking about the transformation. You're talking about more of a societal process, or are you talking about a process within the movement itself? So how do you see transformation? You, yourself. And I was sort of like saying you've got to do transition yourself, you've got to implement it yourself, because, you know, your own values, the own values are part of this transformation process. We're not talking about values as opinions, we're talking about values that you stand for, that you can live with. And I think that I think we need to live our values in a stronger way. And we need to make sure that the necessary, you know, of course we can do it, we can all change our behavior, but it's difficult. You know, if I take X as an example, and it doesn't work, or it's difficult to change your behavior and your way of behaving, even if you really try. And we all need each other, and we need collective ways of imagining things, and these sort of like collective thoughts, and we should be free in the way that we develop these. And that's why climate fiction is exactly the right way, because I think this is kind of like a generational space. And so we were talking about starting off thought processes, and this is why I would now suggest that we're now going to go to the prepared part, and we're going to listen about how Extinction Rebellion is imagining resistance in practical terms. And so we're going to look at a couple of videos that we've prepared earlier.
Courting Arrest by J. Griffiths. Extinction Rebellion. I was locked on at Oxford Circus in the brilliant sunshine of Easter Saturday. Arrest imminent. Lying there immobilised, my hand locked with a chain inside a metal pipe with layers of concrete and roofing felt, I felt my vulnerability intensely. I could feel the heat of sparks flying around my head and smell burning metal as the police cut me out. As a rule, pain frightens me. What's more, I'm a writer, and it was my right hand that was in the lock-on. The police were operating an angle grinder barely an inch from my fingers. Nearby, Hannah, 7 months pregnant, was also locked on. We would be among the last to hold out, together with a solitary 14-year-old and a man in a wheelchair. 2 nights previously, I was handfasted with and to my partner at Parliament Square. Our hands were held together with love and superglue, the moon shining over Westminster Abbey, courting in the middle of a rebellion. David Attenborough's climate change programme was being screened by Extinction Rebellion, the ghostly scaffolding sheeting at the Palace of Westminster a backdrop used as a projection screen. An XR banner, Beyond Politics, was flying in the trees. Not just courting, but courting arrest. We were disappointed that night. The police had been arresting some of those locked on or glued onto the tarmac, but then they packed up and went home for the night. Before they left, they offered us all solvent to release ourselves to have a nicer night. "Why do you want to be arrested?" asked one of the police officers at Oxford Circus. This question is at the heart of Extinction Rebellion. I had never in my life been arrested, for all the usual reasons. A desire to be law-abiding, concern about acquiring a criminal record, nervousness about a fine or imprisonment, fear of being isolated in a locked cell. For XR, I wanted to be able to take non-violent direct action without any of those fears. When you seek arrest, calmly and willingly, the idea of it is no longer a deterrent. The sting is gone. So is the fear, because the way to stop being scared of something is to actively attempt it. One of the most powerful ways to bring about change is when people are willing to be imprisoned for non-violent civil disobedience. In the tradition of the suffragettes, my grandmother, wonderfully, was a Pankhurst, though she never said if she was related to the Pankhursts, and the civil rights movement. Courting arrest means moving from bystander to upstander. Standing up for something infinitely bigger and more important than you. This is the self-sacrificial idea of arrest at the core of Extinction Rebellion's strategy, and it gives you strength from within. Ancient values are overtly resurrected in this Easter rebellion in London. The values of chivalry and honour, faith in life and being in service to Our Lady, Notre Dame, Mother Earth, the mother on whom everything else depends. Everything, as both Notre Dames were burning. Seeking arrest means putting yourself on the line. Rebels with a cause, gently disarming the arm of the law by linking arms with it. The rebels are acting as first responders to the crisis of the natural world, but we are all part of the emergency services now. I had been among the first rebels assigned to take Regent Street, quietly surging across the lanes of traffic at 11 o'clock on the first Monday morning of the rebellion. Up with the night watch, a police officer stationed there came over to congratulate us on the organisation. A well-being tent, free hot meals, a compost toilet, as well as that iconic pink boat stencilled, "Tell the Truth." He paused, then said, "You're standing up for something that needed to be stood up for. We all needed someone to do that. You are doing it. I totally support you." Over the course of the week, I lost count of the number of police officers who said they agreed with us, letting us know in different ways. One police officer driving a van of arrestees was quietly whistling, "I'm sorry, my friend." Another shared her food with a rebel in custody. It took the police about 2 hours to get me and my co-rebel out of the lock-on. In a lull in the proceedings, one of the officers picked out my partner in the crowd and passed on to him my special request that he sing Leonard Cohen's Hallelujah. And I've seen your flag on the Marble Arch, and love is not a victory march. He cupped his hands and sang it to me, and it made people cry. Yes, including me. At that time, Extinction Rebellion flags still held all across central London, from Waterloo Bridge to Marble Arch. A warm and unbroken hallelujah. They say that in the cells, the worst moment is when the cell door clangs shut. It was. I felt like crying. The solitude. The silence. But the acoustics are great in a small tiled room, so I sang instead. Sang badly. Sorry all. When you're in the cells, an XR friend of mine told me, remember, you're choosing to be there. It makes all the difference. It did. In an age which has banalised the word choice, reduced it to consumerist pap, we take it back. There is a choice. To take sides. To be on the right side of history. To choose life over extinction. There is a choice to put oneself on the line because words, and this is a heavy heresy for a writer, are not enough. My friend's case went to court a few weeks ago. The judge gave her the most lenient sentence possible. Her solicitor, referring to the Paris Agreement, mentioned the Paris Commune by mistake and apologised, saying she was a novice when it came to climate change. The judge looked at the solicitor sternly and said, "None of us can afford to be novices when it comes to climate change." In the cells, the police checked on us all through the night, offering us food and drinks, and asking what they could get us in acts of dear hospitality. While I was in custody, an alternative government was being created, a People's Assembly at Marble Arch, where indeed a kind of Paris Commune was established. Now, the stakes are infinitely higher than ever they were in Paris 1871, important though they were. Here, now, unfrightened and non-violent, we are irrepressible. The People's Assembly has moral authority and a transparency that the shrouded Westminster will never know. Tell the truth was the Pink Boat's slogan. So I will. Yes, I have been mightily scared of arrest. Yes, I am a bit feeble when it comes to going without my creature comforts. Yes, I am still daunted by isolation. But the truth is, I'll be doing it again very soon. As we left the police station at 5 o'clock as Easter Sunday dawned, the police wished us well. "You lot have rejuvenated me this week," said one. "It's been the nicest week of my working life," said another. One reached out and shook my hand. God bless, and good luck. This is sweet rebellion.
So, how often were you arrested and taken into custody? You had let yourself be taken into custody. It's an interesting. I think you are arrested. Well, but yeah, but sometimes you provoke arrest. That's what that's the way I do. I haven't been arrested yet. Where in the book there are. No, just honestly, I haven't been arrested yet. Some of the processes where we've been negotiating and we found a settlement. And the people from the rebellion wave who were taken into custody there were. So there was another rebel there who didn't give their identity or reveal their identity, and so they were for a while in custody. And I didn't let myself be arrested yet, and so I think that we hadn't properly planned an action yet that disturbed that to such a level, that we'd really succeeded in being disruptive to such an extent that this step was taken in order to take us into custody, as it were, because sort of like you're involved in quite a lot of roles, but it was.
mir darüber viele, viele Gedanken gemacht.
I did think about this quite a lot,
Und auch nochmal anders, was diese Freiheit, die wir
and
bedeutet.
and also in a way we were thinking about what freedom means to us, and also to activists, and sort of like
umgebracht werden und sterben.
sort of like sometimes people, sort of activists aren't just brought to prison or whatever and taken into custody, but sometimes they're even killed and injured. And when I think of those people, and who's Danny that you were just talking about?
Ja, im Moment wird ja in Hessen für
In Hessen, in Germany,
einen Autobahnbau
they're demonstrating against, protesting against the construction of a motorway, and there's a resistance and sort of like say,
die stattfindet.
so this is a destruction of nature by the state, the last bits of nature that we have, or these last few trees, and so there's insects, protected insects that live there, and
Ja, das sind auf jeden Fall Menschen, die dort in den
And
Bäumen
so,
bei diesen
and so
Temperaturen
people live in trees, and they stay overnight there in the cold to prevent this motorway, and it's still not been authorized. So it's all old legislation, and sort of like sort of like the way these plans are made, and sort of like there's a particular type of logic and processes between there, and sort of like, and it's prehistoric. And these things exist forever, and sort of like, and there's sort of like these planning process, and this is a huge problem because these political objectives that we have, or whatever, it really stops us from implementing these objectives and from attaining them, and so there are so many obligations, and sort of like if you don't stop these things that are already in process, it's going to destroy our way of living and our conditions of life.
Und ob man die Freiheit, die man
And, and if you use the freedom that you have, for example,
Bewegungsfreiheit und nicht in Gefängnis.
sort of like the freedom of movement and the freedom not to sit in prison, and if you can use that in a meaningful way in order to demonstrate and to stand against something. So like, can I just come back to the principle of arrest and custody? If I've really understood properly, you provoke arrest through measures and actions, and the idea is to get arrested. Am I right or not? Yes, the XA strategy, or the first strategy, that was there, yeah? Yeah, we were talking about...
Darum, also es ist schon relativ
So this is quite a while back, and sort of like strategies change over time. But this involves that if you use that 3.5% of the population, they're willing to give up their freedom because the rules of society are no longer right. We need to change them. And if 3.5% of the population are ready to go to prison or to stand up against something, that means that they they're disobedient. They break the rules fixed by society in order to have new rules. Sort of like they chain themselves up, or they glue themselves together on two things, and so they have to be freed by the executive and then taken into custody. And I've got a problem, and you've already talked about this. At the time, we still have rule of law, and so the people who are taken into custody, they know that they are in the rule of law, but in our sort of like in some of the police circles, there are sort of like you've got radical right-wing people who get access to computer data, and you had people who sort of like who made up death target lists in order to target people. And, sort of like they already had sort of like quicklime and things to wrap the bodies in. They were already ready. So is this not a dangerous strategy, especially to go into it voluntarily? I mean, I can imagine that. I know that the strategy of resistance, the idea is that you don't want to be known as being on the wrong side, as it were. You always say diversity of tactics, and The new thing with the XA strategy was that there was mass arrests and mass custody. We seem to say that the situation is so delicate that we need now mass protest, mass movement. And the UK, this really succeeded because we were saying we want to have a new division. And how can this look like in the future? And we want to make ourselves visible and we want to disrupt things. So like, what's our common life going to be like? We're going to have exclusive spaces, we're going to open these, and we're going to defend these against the, and sort of like people who want to, you know, sort of like, maybe if we really try, a new world is completely possible, but let's try by creating these spaces, and then we defend them. So we try to chain ourselves up and sort of like defend these. We want to stay here. We want to stay here in this place a lot of time. We want to think about things, think about what we're doing. Sort of like think about how we can develop discussions and thoughts about how things can be managed in the future. Or sort of like at least let's create the space first, away from the conflict lines. And the new thing that was this new way of taking people into custody was a mass phenomenon. And when people came together, and when they got involved in these new things, that of course on one side you've got, then of course that there are risks, but if you don't talk about them, then you know that this state structure or the state, and that we can, you know, that can be, this can be taken over by really bad people, and then people can hurt us. I don't think it's limited. Of course, you've got to think about your own visibility, and you've got to think about people. You've got to think about people who have increased and enhanced visibility. Of course, this is sort of like sometimes that you can get into danger by doing this. But I do hope, and even though I don't believe that we live in a state where the rule of law prevails, and that, of course, sort of like it's not because people, sort of like activists don't have to fear for their lives. I don't hope that it's a naive hope, but I hope that people who run this state and rule the state, that they will make sure that this doesn't happen. But it is a real danger that I don't underestimate. But I do think we need moments of hope and moments where we can hope to be more active. So we've already seen some things on the videos. So of course there are different types and forms of protesting and demonstrating, or protest resistance, as it were. But we saw Campact. This is about coal. We saw Fridays for Future, and we've already seen Extinction Rebellion. So there are mergers, are there cooperations, is there political power that's being created in a cross-cutting manner across, or is everything silo or parallel? So how do you see things? I do think, I think that it's really a global climate justice movement. We're talking about justice, and we're talking about liberation as well. So this is, of course, it's a movement for freedom. But even though people are trying to present it as a restrictive movement, but most of all, we're talking about freedom movement, and the problem that we're talking about here with climate. Yeah, things are. Yeah, sort of like with the liberal ideas, we just need the appropriate amount of time, and then things are going to develop. But of course, time has become. I think we've let things run a little bit too late. And I think it's so difficult to discuss. I think it's so difficult to talk about it because climate change is so important. And of course, these are different times, sort of like when we're looking at geological time or climate change time. And you were talking during our pre-discussion, you don't want to talk about climate, you were talking about mood. And I thought that was a really interesting sentence, and maybe that could, sort of like bring us over to the more subjective thing of literature. Sort of like, are you thinking about it, not climate change, but mood change? just two things are connected together. And of course, there are a lot of things happening at the moment. And how you can get involved, who can get involved, and when, and what labels you put on things, of course, is. It's important, but it's much more important that movement actually happens, where people find their own role, and then together they make things possible. And this is being created, sort of like we're finding new ways and forms of working together. And because I think that there are more people who really have desire for rebellion in a lot of very important places, and I think that even if they implement the rebellion in different ways and show it in different ways. And we have to make sure that there's an alliance and a link between these different forms, because the question is how we can organize ourselves within a democratic process. So desire for rebellion, but don't you want to read about Klaus as well? What about the parliament? And the question about mood that you were talking about.
Es geht ja immer um Begriffe. Sagen wir mal
we always have different expressions. When we're talking about growth, sort of like which brilliant think tank talked about growth, because growth is such a positive description, sort of like you've got growth in nature, and then you've got the reduction on the other side, and then climate. When we're talking about climate, then of course there's the risk that we get into really complex contexts. And to try to resolve these from a consumer point of view or one's personal daily life, if we try to resolve them. But when you look at the connection with it, is what can I do today? What can I do now? What can I do that other people will hear? What type of things, what type of inspiration can I create where people can be heard, where we can also include other perspectives into things so that better decisions can be made. And if I have concern for something, and it's a type of thought process, what's happening? Maybe we don't even know what we can do. So first of all, we've got to look how we can approach things. How can we approach these problems and topics? And I think that mood here is an interesting concept insofar as because you're talking about perception and feeling. I feel something. And so I let other people feel things as well. And the abstraction here behind this, and also sort of like the distance that you take from this, that helps us to find the right place and the right space. So I don't know if I can talk about climate in a meaningful way, because I'm not a thermodynamic scientist. This is a really complex and abstract topic, and I think that it's like a form of that the meaningful experience will be more important, because I don't know if we really took this into account. I don't know if we'd have so many motorways, and sometimes our senses are badly treated, and we've heard that sort of like that Tegel Airport is going to be closing, and sort of this is just a small example for sort of like broadening one's perspectives and sentence. So would you like to read?
Klaus war sehr dick, sehr frech, manchmal
Sina Kamala, The Federal Fool. Excerpt translated by Lucy Jones. Klaus was very fat, very rude, occasionally funny, and had been elected by direct ballot. The Federal Fool did not shilly-shally. He was unswerving in his message. His voice boomed in a clear but conciliatory tone during his brief inaugural speech in Parliament, as he stepped up to the lectern reeking of alcohol and dressed like a homeless bottle collector, with a plastic bag in one hand and a filthy appearance.
Nicht, dass sie alle nicht ehrlich wären.
Maybe you need someone in this job who you can't all hide behind for once.
Gottes Willen.
Not that I'm calling you
möchte ich nicht
dishonest.
sagen.
God forbid, I wouldn't say that,
Wissen
but
Sie,
can I just say one
uneingeschränkte
thing?
Ehrlichkeit,
If I was completely honest, it would be a lot uglier and funnier than the circus you put on here every day. This is your final warning. I am your wake-up call.
ich bin Ihr Wecker.
See you tomorrow.
Bis morgen dann.
For his outfit, he had consulted the customers and employees of the homeless clothing suppliers just a stone's throw from Parliament,
Die sich
the one next to the homeless drop-in centre. So the miniature vodka, which he placed in front of him on the lectern, was the cheapest of its kind. On his first day of work in Parliament, he disinfected the wounds of the German Federal Republic. Klaus was one among many vice-presidents in the government, but for a clown that was quite something. And for his power of representation, it was a home run. His very next speech caused a sensation and attracted scores of clicks. Social reality comes down to just one thing: trust. No person is something or is somehow. We become, with each other, apart from each other. And you know what else? This would be a minor point if it wasn't for the fact that bureaucracy, which was invented to produce precisely this trust between us, is slowly destroying exactly that. We all know what happens next, and it's dangerous. And that's why you have me. I am going to destroy your trust in this system and restore it in people. You'll feel it. Don't worry. I know you'll never understand it. And then Klaus blew a loud, wet raspberry at the stunned MPs before he strode off in his swanky burqa. Yes, he was wearing a burqa. The federal fool only had 3 employees and the much-entertained public on his side, but he was a source of inspiration to other state officials. A little change in parliamentary rules had sufficed to create his position, to give representative democracy a new lease of life, as the foreign press reported effusively. Among his friends, Klaus joked about how he was a transcendator, but it was obvious that deep down he meant it. The label couldn't be completely dismissed either, because time and time again, his practical yet crazy suggestions for change turbocharged the colossal administrative apparatus, which was on the brink of seizing up altogether, into action. In the inner courtyards of ministries, civil servants, even entire departments, could be spotted crouching among stacks of files, engrossed in chalking mind maps on the paving stones, while holding animated discussions. Things happened that had been thought to be nearly impossible, and to claim that the federal fool's euphoric, reckless and far-fetched ideas had nothing to do with it would be delusional. He poked and prodded the bureaucrats awake. Klaus continued to develop oddball ideas with his consultants, and they rushed through law pitches, as they called their draft bills and project plans. These wild suggestions always contained clear indications of when and with what means the success of these goals would be measured. Team Fool uploaded a rough draft of its catalogue of directives online, so that everyone who wanted to could add their changes, comments and ideas directly into the document. Klaus kept his speeches short and the facts clear. This way he saved energy normally spent on status updates, and instead rattled off concrete suggestions, point by point, measure by measure. He mostly threw in a couple of joke measures too. One of his joke suggestions about Parliament working conditions was a surprise hit. An enormous ball pit, with over 1 million balls, some of which glowed in the dark. It was the biggest in the whole world. Its success was likely due to difficulties in finding capable staff for the IT department. A secure job was no longer enough by a long chalk to attract highly qualified people. Other requirements were a ping-pong table, a flat rate for café latte, and a bit of razzle-dazzle. After it transpired that the Parliament's standard IT passwords, i.e. 12345, had been changed with shocking infrequency, despite the 7-page explanatory email urgently requesting staff to do precisely that, and after another embarrassing server attack for which Russian hackers could only be held responsible to a small section of the public, it was now clear that there was no way around it. A ball pit in the Parliament was inevitable. Any policy was fair game for the federal fool, but his position operated in different ways from the Parliament. Still, Klaus occasionally attended committee meetings to find out what was going on. There he sat on the floor, legs spread in front of him, shoeless in just his socks, making pictures with coloured felt-tip pens in an enormous sketch pad. On the back of his classic light blue shirt was the slogan, "Sit on the floor, it's good for your back," and in slightly smaller lettering underneath, "The Last Bushmen, in cooperation with the AOK, the health insurance company of the people." The shirt was a birthday present from Klaus's former office manager. She had since taken on a new job as manager of the Federal Association of Assistance for the Homeless, and regularly vented her problems to him, which did not pass him unnoticed. "We're releasing people from psychiatric clinics straight onto the street. And what are we supposed to do, right? Just carry on, save taxes, vote for right-wing nationalists? We could also just claim we're building an airport or a motorway and then keep the money and create new kindergartens or homeless shelters. Is anyone here responsible?" he shouted, close to tears. "Fire protection! I'll give you fire protection," he added, before stumbling back up to his desk in the presidential lodge. After this outbreak, "Is anyone here responsible?" became his signature phrase at the end of every speech. Klaus authorised the abolition of mirrors in the toilets of Parliament and all ministries. The money saved on cleaning them was donated to women's shelters in a symbolic gesture, seeing as another 18,000 places were needed across the country. So many women were suffering violence, needed help, and were not being given any. He wondered how the Minister of the Interior and the Federal Minister of Family Affairs could sleep at night, and made it his job to make sure they didn't. Instead of seeing their mirror images, MPs and equal opportunities officers would be shown the current totals of places needed. He would stop short of using pictures of mutilated women's bodies. But soon, other figures were added. The average number of pupils per class, the number of homeless people, the number of drug addicts, the number of extinct insects, the square metres of sealed compared to non-sealed soil surface, the number of illiterates, the gross national product, the average income. Later, there was an online poll to vote for the 10 most scandalous statistics that MPs and civil servants should be faced with, constantly and up to the minute. Data for everyone. Slowly but surely, the federal fool set up what was initially an illegal parallel democracy in precisely the same spot where the mirrors had hung.
Klaus erwirkte die Abschaffung der Toilettenspiegel im Parlament und in allen Ministerien. Das so an Putzdienstleistungen gesparte Geld wurde symbolisch für neue Frauenhäuser gespendet. Denn es fehlten davon über 18.000 im Land. So viele Frauen, die Gewalt erfuhren, Hilfe suchten und keine bekamen. Er fand, weder die Innenministerin noch der Familienminister sollten ruhig schlafen können. Statt ihres Spiegelbilds bekamen die Abgeordneten und Gleichstellungsbeauftragten also jeweils die aktuelle Zahl der fehlenden Plätze angezeigt. Auf Symbolbilder, die Frauen mit versehrten Körpern zeigten, wurde verzichtet. Es kamen aber bald weitere Kennziffern hinzu. Die durchschnittliche Klassengröße an Schulen, die Zahl der Wohnungslosen, die Anzahl der Suchtkranken, die Summe der ausgestorbenen Insekten, die Quadratmeterzahl
of his classic light blue shirt was the slogan, "Sit on the floor, it's good for your back," and in slightly smaller lettering underneath, The Last Bushmen, in cooperation with the AOK, the health insurance company of the people. The shirt was a birthday present from Klaus's former office manager. She had since taken on a new job as manager of the Federal Association of Assistance for the Homeless, and regularly vented her problems to him, which did not pass him unnoticed. "We're releasing people from psychiatric clinics straight onto the street. And what are we supposed to do, right? Just carry on, save taxes, vote for right-wing nationalists? We could also just claim we're building an airport or a motorway and then keep the money and create new kindergartens or homes."
So, would you call this satire? Or describe it as satire? What? The text about Klaus? Or do you see him as being a tragic figure? I'm calling him the clown of the nation. So the motto of the festival is, where there's where there's increased danger, then literature should also have sharper teeth, as it were. But, but you want this to have an effect and to work. And for me, this is a little bit like an everyday story, but with this very brutal, this guy will be killed. So the woman as a victim is not really the topic here. Violence, I see violence, resistance in its own context. So this is a story that's motivated by violence. Okay, with Lotta, there are two different questions here. So it's also a story that you're referring to as the competition week story. Okay, sorry. And the competition week is in practically in a dystopian. I mean, people are always asking whether it's utopian or dystopian. It's dystopian, and so there are competitions about the different ways that we can save electricity, and so there's sort of like digital visibility of consumption, and so to the extent that's also looking to the future to some extent. And you can also look about this social life and the observation where Lotta is practically controlled, even how she moves. And, we have to see how we can resolve contradictions or not. And the cat and sort of like the question of a woman as a victim, I don't know. I wondered what, of course, that's a double role in which I've just read the book about this, The Happy Woman, where violence and aggressivity and aggression and femininity is a big question and topic there. And of course, what would happen if women were to give way to their deepest desires, and if they really want to deliberately throw the baby out with the bathwater, as it were? I don't know if the society would keep together, whether it would just fall apart. And sort of like violent and bare. I must say that I think that the question is stupid because I haven't understood it completely. Yeah, of course, that could also be a reason. So, sort of like because you're talking about sort of like you're talking from the heart, and I always talk from books. And Judith Butler has just published a new book about violence, and there are also other things about this topic. And I just found that this story was very illustrative for all of these current discourses, and maybe that some of this was an intentional, strategic. Yeah, I really believe that there is a connection between all of this. I think that we need to overcome violence, and we need to know where violence takes place, structural and physically. And but should we, but we should have the sincere objective of being able to overcoming violence. And I think that would be the most wonderful thing we could do. And take it seriously, and not just to behave as if, what do we do on the world otherwise? Are we here to kill each other, or are we here to develop new forms of cooperation? And without damaging other people in the process? Is that a legitimate way of doing things? But I really try to get in depth in the topic and try to see all the rhetoric behind it and everything. Because people are always saying this is, sort of like this is part of human nature, and women have this double position of, yeah, it's good, sort of like you're so peacefully living, and then at the same time, but you're sort of like then that's sort of like this passive aggressivity but I'm just I'm shortening things here, but sort of like maybe these are thoughts and reflections that we've got, things that we've got to be asking ourselves, because I think that we've come a long way, sort of like about dealing with a violence-free society. But I think that we should go further into depth with this, or at least that's what I'd like to do. And I think that women can play a big role, and hopefully not just as victims. Yeah, of course. And but you're writing, so you're active. But are you doing anything new at the moment? Are you writing anything new? Yeah. I'm writing something new about a young woman. I don't know if I want to give the secret away. So you don't want to let the cat out of the bag? It's a sorry, no, it's a we're talking about the suicide of a young mother, and what else were you asking about? And so, is it a story? Is it a novel? What's the form of the book? It's going to be a novel. So it also deals with collective suicide. What we're doing, we're committing suicide if we continue to live as we have been, and then you look at an individual suicide, and all talking about the sort of like the biggest freedom that you have of all is to take your life or not, and you know, sort of like to end your life in that form. It's a very intensive work, and thought, you know, I've never written a novel before, and you know, when I'm writing it, you know, sort of like you wonder about the way and the manner in which one would do this. Yeah, it's quite intensive. So now, we're at the end of the hour. Thank you very much. Thank you. So I'm just going to tell you that now there's going to be a performance event here, which is called Time Capsule, and which is a performance by Michael Vogel, the poet, who talks in poetic form with extinct animals. And there's also then sort of like another sound artist. And tomorrow we're going to proceed again with 3 panels. They're going to be streamed. They're the international panels. We're going to talk about the body and climate change. We're going to talk about the climate fiction or eco-poetry from Denmark, climate fiction in Switzerland. And in the evening then we're going to have a live panel here, 2 live panels in fact, one with John Jane Hooper from the Potsdam Institution for Climate Research and Elia Troyanov, Megachin from Great Britain, and Siegland is going to moderate this. And these are tipping points, and there's going to be Cli-Fi Islands, so Helena Kowski is going to do that with Roman Ehrlich. And we are very excited about what's going to happen tomorrow. So thank you, Sina Kamala Kaufmann, once again, and thank you for watching and listening.